is issuing such a thing.
By all means, but I'm all ears.
Right. Well, the first thing you do is you have to understand that currency at the moment is simply printed by governments, and we say this currency is worth, this bit of paper is worth $1 or $100 or whatever it is. And if you believe the government, then okay, it's worth $1 or $100. But we don't believe governments, and that's where inflation comes from. Why don't we believe governments? Very simple. It's because the governments lie just as rapidly about the value of the pieces of paper they and they alone are allowed to print in our name as they do about everything else. There is no asset sitting in a bank vault somewhere, sitting in the Federal Reserve, to back up even a tiny fraction of the value of the currency in issue at any one time. The entire system of currency and finance is based on a legalized fiction, and it is a crooked fiction. So how do we fix that? Well, you can fix it, interestingly, at zero cost. What you do is you say, right, bye-bye to the dollar. The dollar has had its day. What we're going to do instead is to say that anyone who has dollars, those dollars from, say, 2 or 3 weeks' time or 2 or 3 months' time, will have no longer any value. We are going to issue a new currency at so many dollars per $100. We're going to issue completely new American currency. But this time, every time you bring in your dollars or your sterling or your euros or your yen or whatever Mickey Mouse toy town monopoly money currency that you're using now, you bring that to us. We will issue, let us call it the talent, in honor of our blessed Lord who named that as the store of value in his own time. Let's call it the talent. Now, how do you make sure that the talent doesn't go the way of other currencies? What you do is, but as soon as the government issues talents and receives dollars or pounds in exchange, it spends those dollars or pounds straight away on buying real assets. They might be gold, silver, platinum, solid assets of that kind. They might be shares in reputable companies, because shares in reputable companies are a lot better than shares in government debt just at the moment. And they might be real estate. They might be assets of every kind, as long as they are real assets that you can touch and see, assets that have a known book value, and assets which are traded on the open market at that value. And then what you do is there must be a currency board for each such currency, for the talent, in other words, which holds those assets so that every talent in issue has at least one talent's worth of assets held by the currency board. Now, in that way, the currency board becomes, if you like, rather like a prudentially managed pension fund with real assets in it, so that even if everyone who holds talent turns up on the same day and says, this is a run on the talent, I want my money back, they'll get their money back in full, because the currency board has enough assets to make sure that everybody does get paid back. Now, you may say, is there any example anywhere in history of this ever having been done? I'm going to give you one example, simply because it is the most recent example, and it ended really 150 years ago. And this was in Hamburg, which was a state in its own right in what's now Germany. And for 250 years, until Napoleon the Invader marched in to the Hamburg Central Bank, the Hamburg Bank issued effectively a currency, it was a paper currency, backed by silver. That was the asset which it chose to keep as its single store of value. These days we would choose more widely, but that's what they did then. And when Napoleon invaded the bank and took over the assets, he found that the bank had issued, in today's money, let's call it $70 billion worth of pieces of paper, saying this piece of paper of, let us say, $100 is backed by $100 worth of silver in the vaults of the bank. So even if you all turn up, you'll all get your silver all right. And so then Napoleon, having realized there was 70 billion in issue of pieces of paper, went to the bank vaults and found nearly 80 billion of silver sitting there in the vaults. That is how well run the Hamburg Currency Board was. And that gave the Hamburg area a prosperity and a peace and a stability in financial terms that has been pretty much unrivaled anywhere in the world before or since, because the government of Hamburg ran an honest currency. And if you run an honest currency, then the whole of the rest of the financial system tends to be that much more honest too. So our first step towards rebuilding a new and more honest governmental capitalism is to make sure that in future there are currency boards competing with one another to issue sound money for the first time in the modern age. Now, why do I say competing with one another? Because a currency board is, in effect, a kind of bank. It's a very simple one. It doesn't do lending against its assets, because that would put the assets at risk in the manner which we've seen all too horrifyingly clearly in the last few months. Instead, it doesn't do that, but it's still an organization which, if it became so very big, and then there were everybody wanting their money back at the same time, the currency board would find that the assets it was giving back to them might decline rather sharply in value on the markets. So you don't want any individual currency board to become too big. And that means that governments shouldn't be allowed to issue currency at all, because governments are too big. You need to have private currency boards around the world competing with one another to issue the soundest and best money, perhaps even to issue money that pays interest. And have you thought of that? Banknotes that pay interest. Well, is there such a thing in the existing system? Yes, there is. You may have known that savings and loans and banks in the United States have been issuing things called certificates of deposit.
Right.
These are large denomination banknotes, in effect, which also pay interest. And how can the banks afford to do that? Well, because if it's a currency board that's doing it, it has assets in its portfolio, which, if it manages them well, will tend, as assets do, to appreciate in value over the longer term. Corporations are there to do well and make money. Most of them succeed at that. Land, there's only a certain fixed amount of it, so real estate will tend to go up in value more or less continuously. And the same with most other assets. There's a growing population in the world, a finite amount of assets, therefore the asset value will tend to increase. And that means that the currency boards can even compete with each other to pay prudential but nevertheless definite rates of interest, so that if you hold their currency, you're also getting a small but significant real rate of interest on your money. Now that is the way to run the currency, and that's the first step towards rebuilding capitalism. Get the government out of printing fiat money, as it's called, money whose value can and does and has it throughout history collapsed appallingly. I mean, the dollar, if you think, when you go back to when the Republic was founded, the dollar compared with then is worth less than 1 cent.
Yes.
Because the rest has been robbed from the people by inflation. And who gets the profit from inflation? Answer, the government does. Do the people get it? No. It goes into the pockets of bankers and governments, out of the pockets of the people. Inflation is theft. It's theft from the people by the governing class and the financial class. And it is time we, the people, simply said, we're not going there anymore. Now, here's the thing. Precisely because currency boards are private institutions, there is nothing to stop currency boards coming into being right now. The currency couldn't lawfully be called a currency because governments at the moment arrogantly to themselves the exclusive right to cheat the people by issuing their bogus fiat paper currencies that they issue now with no assets in the Federal Reserve to back them up. But if we were to call it an instrument of saving, and yet an instrument in which the affairs of businesses and individual households were denominated, then it would have all the characteristics of a currency except one. It wouldn't be the bogus, inflating, thieving paper currency of governments. It would be the sound, asset-backed currency that gave Hamburg that stability and prosperity that was only brought to an end by external invasion after 250 years. So that is the first step that I think we, the citizens, have now got to take. We've got to take back the right to issue currency, in effect, and we don't have to wait for the government's permission to do this. We've just got to get together, form currency boards, and start doing it. All it requires is a fund manager with a knowledge of how to manage finance, and a bookkeeper who can keep the records straight, and an external auditor for each currency board to make sure that the currency board is indeed holding assets that at least equal the amount of talent in issue. And if that is done, then we can start this today, and we should start this today, then we can stabilize the currency system to make sure that for the first time in my lifetime, indeed in the first time in the last 150 years, the world has honest money again. That is step one.
That is a very amazing plan. Of course, it almost makes too much sense, don't you think, John? John, are you there?
Yes, I am. I'm right here. Absolutely.
Very good.
It makes a lot of sense. I have a question for Lord Monckton, if you don't mind, Joe.
Go ahead, by all means.
Lord Monckton, it's widely known here within the alternative media that the Gulf Stream has stopped, causing this winter, according to, I believe it was either the Sun or the London Times, that the winter will be much more harsh for many Britons. And considering the fact that the austerity measures that are put into place, that the EU wants £900 million from the UK, and that will cost 500,000 jobs. What will those people do this winter to stay warm, considering the fact that it's going to be much colder due to the fact that the Gulf Stream has stopped and they no longer have a job to pay the heating bill?
Right. Let's deal with this one. First of all, the Gulf Stream cannot stop, right, because while the Earth continues to rotate and the wind continues to blow, it is necessary for what is known as a thermohaline circulation, which is the great pattern of connected, really continuous ocean currents that go all the way around the world's oceans, of which the Gulf Stream is just one part that reaches up in particular towards the southwest coast of Scotland and keeps Scotland, where I live, just that little bit warmer than anybody else at our northern latitudes. That Gulf Stream cannot stop. Its characteristics will vary from time to time. What is going on at the moment is that we are passing from an El Nino southern oscillation, which is a pattern of ocean currents that gives you exceptionally warm weather worldwide, and we've had that for the past 6 or 8 months, and now we're heading towards the opposite conditions, not quite the profound La Nina that we saw, that's the cooling phase, at the depth of, say, 2008, when we had very cold winters in 2008 and 2009. We'll see a lesser decline than that, but that is not the Gulf Stream stopping. Mm-hmm. These are the known phases of what are called the four great oscillations of the ocean, which are all part of this thermohaline circulation. It is the southern oscillation, El Nino southern oscillation, which causes the short-term, very sharp fluctuations in temperature that we've seen over the last 5 years. First of all, a small peak in 2007, then a plunge towards a very deep La Nina, leading to cold weather worldwide. Now, an increase, really, of more than 1 Celsius degree just over the last sort of 18 months. as we rise to a new and quite strong El Nino, and now temperatures are going to start dropping back again.